Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to show you how to make an original Bootstrap layout using Dreamweaver. This is a great skill to have, especially if you start to find that some of the pre-built Bootstrap layouts that come with Dreamweaver just aren't meeting your needs. The first thing I'm going to do is make a new site. So I'm going to go to the Site menu and select New Site. And from the Site dialog box, I'm going to give my site the name of Boot Layout, and then I'm going to select the folder for the site. I'm going to put that just out on my desktop for right now. Make a new folder. I'm also going to call that Boot Layout. Click Create. Click Choose after I have it selected there, and then click Save. And now I'm set up to benefit from all the site management tools that run in Dreamweaver. And the first of those we're going to be relying on is how Dreamweaver will create all of your necessary Bootstrap files for your Bootstrap site. To do that, I'm going to go to File and New to create a new page that will allow me to trigger all of the Bootstrap elements to be generated by Dreamweaver. When you open the New Document dialog box, by default you're normally on this None tab. If you click on Bootstrap, you'll see that you have some options here. The first deals with the CSS. Do you need Dreamweaver to make a new copy of that Bootstrap CSS for you, or are you making a page that's going to rely on a Bootstrap CSS that it's already generated? We need a new Bootstrap CSS for this example site, so I'll leave that checked. And then also by default, you'll find that this Design Include a Pre-Built Layout box is normally checked. So I'm going to uncheck that because I don't want a pre-built layout. The whole point of the video is to show you how to make your own. With those things taken care of, I'm going to go ahead and click Create. So Dreamweaver works its magic. It generates the CSS folder with the Bootstrap CSS and the necessary supporting JavaScript files. I'm going to work in split view today so you can see my code and the live view window. So I'm going to zoom in here on my code so you can see that a little bit better. And one of the first things you'll notice is that right now my link to those files that Dreamweaver just generated is kind of clumsy. It has the file / Macintosh, all of that information that we don't typically need. Right now it's in there because we haven't saved this HTML file yet. So I'm going to do that so I have a nice clean file path. So File, Save, and I'm just going to call this Index. And once I click Save, Dreamweaver goes ahead and rewrites that directory path to reflect that our index file, the index.html file we just saved, is in the same folder that contains the CSS folder and the JavaScript folder. The Bootstrap layout I'm going to create is a pretty simple one. Here you see how I've just laid it out real quickly in Microsoft Word to depict what I'm kind of going for. My first row is going to have one column. My second row is going to have one column. My third row will have 3, and then my fourth row will only have 1. So just really simple, straightforward row and column setup. Back over in Dreamweaver, I'm ready to start putting in the various Bootstrap components that I need to actually make that layout a reality. I'm going to click on the body element using the element display that's up in the live view portion of Dreamweaver. You'll see that the body element is selected in the code as well. Then I'm going to go over to the insert panel over in the right. The insert panel by default will normally have the HTML elements pulled up, but with that pull down menu you can jump right over to Bootstrap components. The first component I want to use is the container component, and this is the component that's going to hold all of my rows. In this particular container component that exists in Bootstrap also centers our content so that we can see a little bit of the body element behind it there. When I clicked on it, you could see that it dropped it right in. There we have it inside of our body element. And so step 1 is accomplished. Next, what I want to do is start placing some of the rows and columns inside of that container so that I can get that layout that I showed you a moment ago. To do that, I'm going to go up to my live view and click on container. And it jumped away on me there, so I'll click on body. Then I'll use my down arrow on the keyboard to navigate to the div with the container class applied to it. So we can see that's selected now. Now I go to my grid row with column option in the insert panel and click it. And that brings up the insert row with column dialog box. What I want for that first row is a row that just has one column. So I select that 3, replace it with a 1, and then I need to tell Dreamweaver where I want that row placed in relation to what I currently have selected. What I currently have selected is that container div. I want this row to be inside of it, so I'm going to select nest. If you don't have that option, if everything is grayed out, it just has to do with how you had the element on your page selected. You can just try clicking OK and see where it drops it. You might need to move a closing div tag or something, or you could just hit cancel and go back through the steps that I just did to make sure that you have the whole div container selected so that you can just use nest. I click the OK button and here we are. It has put that row right inside of the container like I wanted it to. It's moved the closing div tag down for that container, and it's right here. So here's all my new stuff. I'm going to go back up into the live view window, and I'm just going to click on div. You can see it has div.row. We can see in the code that it's selecting that entire row that I just placed, and that means I'm ready to place another one. So I go back to grid row with column. How many columns wide? Well, I want it to be, 1 column wide, and I want it to be after the row I just placed, or after the row that I have selected. So I click after, then I click OK, and it drops it into place. You'll notice in the code that as I drop those rows into place, the column is represented right here. The column has a class of col-xl-12 applied to it. You might see something a little bit differently. It's going to depend on the size your screen is at right now. What Dreamweaver likes to do is if you're in the extra large display window, which I am right now, if we look up at the top, we can see that I'm in the 1200, beyond the 1200 pixel mark, so that's in the extra large size. If you are looking up and your screen is set so that it's right here in large, then when you add a grid row with a column, Dreamweaver is going to assign a class of col-lg-12. Essentially, Dreamweaver will just assign the screen size class based on the screen size you're using when you place it. Why the 12 when we said 1 column wide? Well, keep in mind that Bootstrap is based on a 12 column grid. And so we're essentially saying we want this column to span across all 12 of the possible columns that are available to us. And that's also what we do then with that next one. But our third row is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to click on the element display for the row we just put in place, and you'll see that actually what I clicked on selected the column div that we have here. To get to the appropriate, it's actually the column div for the first row. To get to the appropriate thing, we could just click off and keep clicking back. But the easier thing to do is just use your down arrows. And the down arrow is going to allow you to go to the next element that's further down. If yours isn't doing that, for example, let's say maybe you've clicked inside of that element up in the live view, your arrows aren't going to work, right? See, I'm trying to hit my arrows right now. It's not doing what it needs to do. You can also see the orange line that's representing that we're inside of that element. And we could actually, edit the text here, right? We could get in and change that. To get this back so that you can use the arrows and so that you can make sure that you have the right and complete element selected, again, you just click on the element display somewhere on the blue. Now we see the blue lines around the entire element that we have. And right now it is just that column, but I can hit the up arrow and now I have that entire row selected. So with that row selected, I'm going back to grid row with column. I'm going to click on it. This time I do want to have 3 columns, and I want it to be after the currently selected row. So I just click OK and drop it in. And we can see that 3-column row in place right here. I'm going to click on the element display to select that element, hit my up arrow a few times so I can get the entire row, and then add one more grid row. This is going to be my footer eventually. So I want it to be 1 column, and I want it to be after the row that I have selected here. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Essentially, that's all there is to actually creating the layout. But there's one more step I'm going to take, because I think it is just an enormous pain to work in a Bootstrap layout when all of your elements are divs. So I'm going to show you a quick way that you can change them. I'm going to click up in the first row. We can see the col XL12, so we know I'm in a column, not the actual row-based div. I'm going to click on the element display and just hit my up arrow. We can confirm with the HTML that I am actually in that row now. And what I'm going to do with that selected through my live view here is, on a Mac, Command T, on a PC, Control T, and that's going to bring up your quick tag editor. One of the things that can be tricky about working with an original Bootstrap layout is that by default, all of the rows and columns we just put in place use the div element. It can get pretty tricky to spot the element you actually want to edit or make a change to by adding another class to it. So what I'm going to do is show you how you can very quickly change some of those divs to semantic elements that are going to be much easier for you to identify as you're working with your code. So I'm going to click in the first row, and that got me inside of a column. So I'll click the blue element display, hit my up arrow. Now I have that full row. On a Mac, you can push Command T. On a PC, it'll be Control T, and that'll bring you the quick tag editor. In that tag editor, I just double-clicked on div, and I'm going to type header, that semantic element that we use for headers. I'm going to hit return twice, and what Dreamweaver does for me is it changes the opening and closing div tags to header for that element. Nice, quick, easy way to edit it. I'm going to hit my down arrow because I still have that selected, but if you didn't still have it selected, you can just click and get where you need to go with that method I've been showing you. Here we are. So with this next row, that's going to be my navigation. So I'll do that Command T, and I'm going to change the div to nav. Now, if you're struggling at all with semantic elements, there are a lot of great resources online. Check the W3 Schools site. That's a great place to look these up. And make sure that you're using true semantic elements that are going to work in HTML. I'm going to click down a row, click on that element display, hit my arrow, and that's going to take me up to the row. For this one, I'm going to call this one main. And then I actually am going to rename the elements inside of this one. So that first column right here, I'm going to use the aside semantic element on. I'm going to go down to the next one, and on this one, I'm going to make this the article semantic element. And then for my last one, I'm going to make that another aside. And then finally, that gets me down to my footer. And there we go. The basic layout is done. I've got all the rows and columns that I need. The only thing that remains left to do in this step is to adjust the size of the columns inside of that main row that I have here. I don't want them to all be evenly divided into spanning 4 of Bootstrap's column widths. I want the asides to be a little narrower than the main article, the article element. So I'm going to change both of those to 3, and I will change the article to 6. And so that gives me a little bit more room to play with when I actually start adding content to my article. And also asides, well, they should be narrower, and so that just kind of fits well with that layout. Of course, there's much more we could do to this really basic layout by adding some additional classes to it to represent different screen sizes. So right now we just have XL represented, extra large, but that's a little bit outside the scope of this particular video. We were just aiming to get that basic layout in place. And so we'll leave it right there.